Hi, this is a short introduction to sustainable development, the concept as such, and the Sustainable Development Goals. Vast parts of Europe in the late medieval ages and the centuries hereafter, characterized by the degradation of the natural ecosystems, namely the forests, and the depletion of natural resources. And scientists such as John Evelyn have been suggesting to restore the potential of nature and to replant resources. This is the very origin of the systematic forestry, endorsed and amended by Hans Carl von Carlowitz in 1713, who wrote a book on Silvicultura Economica, and how to plant trees in order to regrow resources required by mining industry, amongst others. And he coined this famous sentence mentioning the greatest art, science, diligence, and institution that would consist in conservation and cultivation of wood that can be arranged as to make possible a continuous, steady, and sustaining use, which would be the requirement for maintaining the being of the country. The word as such goes back to the Latin term sustinere, which means holding out, enduring, withstanding, a word whose meaning was shifting during the centuries, initially also including the sense of being tolerable, bearable, but then ever more so shifting to acceptable, and it became a key term of the environmental movement and the modern, concept of development. This is an extremely rough timeline of the evolution of sustainability, which kind of started with the invention of the term and the crisis management, handling scarcity of resources. And in a way, this was, the same reaction now on a more global scale in the 1960s and 70s to obvious crisis and the need to change conventional development regimes. The world witnessed a series of problems triggered by the industrialization, for example, of agriculture. Rachel Carson's Silent Spring was moving a global audience with the scenario of losing biodiversity, such as the singing birds in spring that would not exist anymore. There was also a new perspective on Earth thanks to the trips to the moon and the pictures of Earth being a blue marble, a tiny, vulnerable planet in the vast universe. And on a scientific basis, Dennis Meadows and colleagues published the report to the Club of Rome, which was called The Limits to Growth, showing with simple computer science and some models, the Earth model, that, very steep exponential growth would be followed by collapse, or at least shocks, and anything and everything that would be different from a scenario that could be called sustainable. The word sustainable still was not on the agenda. This was changed in the late 1980s with a report of the World Commission on Environment and Development, the so-called Brundtland Commission, chaired by Gro Harlem Brundtland, former Prime Minister of Norway, and where the new concept of sustainability was coined. Preparing the Earth Summit in 1992 in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, which was an enormous milestone and a turning point, kind of for the first time in history, both states coming together and producing mechanisms, instruments for processes that should lead to sustainable development, culminating in the last days of 2015 with the comprehensive agenda for sustainable development, the Sustainable Development Goals. Sustainable development was defined from an anthropocentric perspective, clearly looking at, well, the sustained existence of people, the sustained absence of poverty, and what was revolutionary at that time, that the common future was explicitly including the interests of future generations in the agenda of today's development. So this is the famous definition of the World Commission on Environment and Development, the so-called Brundtland Commission, the Brundtland Report, with the Brundtland definition of sustainable development. That is a development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. The concept is a new one, but based in different fundaments of different cultures striving for living in harmony with nature, which would be something different than sustainable development, a concept being criticized also for being an oxymoron, maybe something as development being not really compatible with the state of sustainability that includes not compromising the interests of future generations. Sustainability is a concept of caretaking, being responsible in the use of natural resources, having respect for nature, being an inherent element of many religions worldwide. Nevertheless, the political career of the concept really took off in 1992 with the first Earth Summit, the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, where around 10,000 delegates from 178 states participated and produced a series of epoch-making documents, including the Framework Convention on Climatic Change, the conventions on biodiversity and combating desertification, the Agenda 21, the Forest Principles, and the Rio Declaration on Environment and Development. It was also the starting point of a series of further conferences where the progress was reviewed of, these processes triggered and facilitated by these documents. In the year 2000, almost after a decade, it became clear that the agenda was not explicit enough. There were specific goals missing, and there was not enough progress, or progress actually was not measurable. And this led to the formulation of goals for the first time, global goals, which followed the Millennium Summit in New York City, and are an outcome of the Millennium Declaration. They are representing 8 goals, mainly targeting human well-being and the eradication of poverty, hunger, targeting education, promoting gender equality and empowering women, reducing child mortality, improving maternal health, combating diseases, and then as one goal also ensuring the environmental sustainability and covering the global partnership for development. This set of goals had to orient the development for a decade, became the basis for a new development cooperation architecture. In the process of implementing them, and better understanding this agenda, it became clear they were not comprehensive enough and not complete enough. And the process then culminated in a new strategy for a sustainable world in 2015, almost 2016, formulating the global goals for sustainable development, or the sustainable development goals, now representing 17 topics um, from all aspects of human well-being and resources required for that, and now also covering more explicitly additional aspects of the global ecosystems, the climate, and also the productive basis for sustainable development. So these goals were operationalized and are complemented by specific and clear indicators, more or less measurable, to be verified after a certain period. Uh, in general, this agenda is to be accomplished by 2030. So eliminating the poverty, for example, and well, now the more specific goals allow for a periodic reporting. There is an ongoing progress monitoring and reporting where it's possible to see, for instance, that after half a decade, well, poverty has not ended in all forms everywhere. So this goal is not on track currently. A very interesting goal refers to economic growth, which implies that for many actors, growth is a synonym of development. And then again, it is not plausible that infinite growth is possible on a finite Earth. And the question is if annual growth rate of real gross domestic products per capita are appropriate measures for describing progress in terms of the quality of life, a good living. And this also has implications, this goal, for potentially contrasting or hampering actually the accomplishment of other goals, such as the conservation of life on Earth, where by 2020 the conservation, restoration and sustainable use of terrestrial and inland freshwater ecosystems and their services, in particular forests, wetlands, mountains and drylands, are in line with obligations under international agreements, which is clearly a goal that is not on track at all. The critique targeting this global development agenda refers to the aspect that these goals are standing, well, in a row, and well, there is no hierarchy, no priority setting that would describe which goal has to be accomplished first, or like with a higher priority than others. For some, such as the climate action goal, would be the most important. Without combating climate change, without mitigating the current rate of climatic change, all the other goals cannot be accomplished in the mid and in the long term. And others would say the functionality of the global ecosystem is equally important, and the precondition for life on Earth, including human life. And others would say, well, it is impossible to conserve ecosystems and develop sustainable institutions and combat hunger without having a peace regime and strong institutions that, well, safeguard cooperation. So there are attempts of getting to grips with the order, hierarchy, priority of these goals. And there is this donut structure suggesting that, well, there are planetary boundaries and ecological ceiling, which is well, of utmost importance, referring to the SDGs that take care of life on Earth and in the oceans, the climate, and within this ring, the ecological ceiling, the social and socioeconomic goals then would follow. So a nice depiction of such a hierarchy or interdependence is given by Johan Rockström and Prof. in this graph, where the biosphere is the fundament and the outer ceiling of what represents society, and the corresponding goals and economy being important but dependent on a functional society. And this still would not consider the interactions of the goals, the interdependence of the goals, that some are milestones for achieving others, or the contrasts and conflicts as well have to be addressed appropriately, and the interdependence. And this is the ongoing debate, like how to implement this global agenda in a systemic way in order to meet the needs of today's people as much as the needs of the future generations.